Earlier today, the House approved a $2 trillion economic stimulus package. That vote comes as the economy is shuddering due to the virus. Jobless claims are skyrocketing, and the stock market is on edge. But it wasn't without drama. The bill was passed by voice vote following hours of contention sparked by Kentucky Republican Tom Massie, who tried and failed to force a roll call vote. President Trump derided him on Twitter as a grandstander who should be tossed out of the GOP. Later on Friday, the president signed the bill. In brief, it will send $1,200 checks to many Americans and hundreds of billions of dollars to small and large businesses, plus $250 billion to boost unemployment insurance, offering $600 per week for 4 months for laid-off workers. Joining us now are 4 reporters who are covering Washington's response to the virus. Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Eamon Javers, Washington correspondent for CNBC. Manu Raju, senior congressional correspondent for CNN. And joining us here at the table, Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Eamon, we will begin with you. This legislation, when you talk to economists and business leaders, is it seen as a full solution for this economic trouble or just a Band-Aid?
It's not seen as a full solution, Bob, but it is seen as a good, solid first step. You saw the market respond very favorably to this week, although we were down today. But in anticipation of this bill, we did see a big market rally. I think investors look at this as a very good first step from Congress, but they acknowledge that they're going to need to see more. And you heard that from congressional leaders as well. Remember, it's a $24 trillion annual economy. This is a $2 trillion bill. The economy has gone to something close to zero. I mean, when you see these unemployment claims, 3.3 million people applied for unemployment this week. That's the biggest ever. The previous record was in the 600,000 range back in 1982. We are way past that. We are in uncharted territory in terms of the economy, and Congress is beginning to get its arms around the size of the problem that it's dealing with here.
Manu, you were at the Capitol. You've been covering this all week. How close was Congressman Massie of Kentucky to scuttling this entire bill?
Well, he was close to delaying this a little bit further, but actually Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, and the House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, worked behind the scenes to prevent that from happening. What Tom Massie actually was successful in doing was getting half of the House to return to session. And members were not happy about that because what he wanted to do was to prevent the House from approving it simply by a voice vote. And when you have a voice vote in the House, that you could just have a handful of members in the chamber to do just that. But what Massie wanted was a full recorded vote. That means members would have to vote in person, cast a roll call vote. But in order for him to get a roll call vote, he essentially would need to have a second support from about a fifth of the chamber to go that way. But in order for Nancy Pelosi and the Republican leader to deny that from happening, they had to get an actual quorum, an actual 216 members had to be present to deny Thomas Massie the second that he needed in order to force that roll call vote. So that means, Bob, that Republican and Democratic members from all over the country had to travel back to Washington today just to prevent that from happening. And that infuriated members from both sides of the aisle who were concerned about their well-being, their families' well-being, concerned about traveling in the middle of this public health emergency. And as a result, they came to Washington, and the end result was the same as what they initially wanted, was a quick voice vote. And that's what ultimately happened. It got passed quickly. Thomas Massie got overruled here, and the bill went into law just hours later.
What a different scene in the Senate, Susan, a 96-0 vote. When you step back and look at that bipartisanship, what explains it based on your reporting, not only now, but at previous crises like the 2008 financial crisis?
You know, I was thinking about the 2008 experience because you remember that first effort to pass a big bailout bill fail, and the market tanked, and there was a real sense of a crisis getting even worse. But the Republican leader in the Senate at that point, Mitch McConnell, the Speaker of the House was Nancy Pelosi. They got a deal put back together and passed through the House. That was really the critical vote that time around because they had to. And so we had two people who had dealt with a similar situation in the past, knew it had to get done. You know, I think we shouldn't lose sight of how remarkable this is. We have basically a dysfunctional Congress, but in the space of a week or two, they negotiated a $2 trillion bill, the biggest relief bill in American history, and got it through almost unanimously through both houses.
Yamiche, as much as Congress has made progress on this legislation, President Trump at the White House is still moving forward to invoke the Defense Production Act, trying to nudge General Motors and other companies to produce things like ventilators. What is the scene and the mood at the White House, despite what happened in Congress? Why are they moving forward in this way today on the DPA?
Well, the president is invoking the Defense Production Act, which, of course, is when the government can direct American manufacturers to make what the government says they need. In this case, the government is telling General Motors, we really need ventilators. You have to now take our orders and prioritize our contracts. This happened because the president and the White House says that they were negotiating with General Motors, but that General Motors was, quote, ripping them off. Those are the President Trump's words, and that they were trying to essentially charge the government too much to make these ventilators to speed up those talks. The president did this. What's interesting, though, of course, is that governors, both Republican and Democrat, have been urging the president to use the Defense Production Act for weeks. They've said for weeks, we need not just ventilators, but masks, we need gloves, we need gowns for hospitals. We're in dire shortage of all of those things. And this is just the president doing one company for one specific medical equipment. The other thing to note is that the president said yesterday on Fox News that he doesn't believe that some of these governors need all of the medical equipment that they've been asking for. Specifically, he said, I don't think that New York possibly needs 30,000 ventilators. And of course, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been urging the president and saying, I need 30,000 ventilators. So it's unclear whether or not, even with the president invoking the Defense Production Act, whether or not he believes and will fill the orders and requests coming from governors across the country.
And many of these governors I spoke to this week, Eamon, like Governor DeWine of Ohio and Governor Whitmer of Michigan, they're really paying attention to small businesses in their state, and they're wondering, will this legislation enable those businesses, large and small, to get the loans as soon as possible because the economy, in their view, is on a knife's edge?
Yeah, there's an important provision in here, Bob, and anybody who's watching who's a small business owner needs to know about this. It's an expansion of the Small Business Administration's 7A loan program, and what it does is something radical and new in American legislation and in the economy. It's, in essence, free money for small businesses if they agree not to lay anybody off over a period of time. So you get an 8-week loan of up to $10 million for companies that are 500 employees or less. And if at the end of the period of time in the bill, if you haven't laid anybody off, you get to keep the money. So that's free money. We've never seen anything like that before in American economics. So it's going to be a fascinating moment. There are some, particulars to the bill that small businesses are going to need to pay attention to, but this is potentially huge. It's authorized as up to $350 billion or more in the bill. My suspicion is it will go much, much higher than that because a lot more small businesses are going to apply once they realize this is out there. The way to get this, if you're a small business owner, is to go to your regular banker, your regular lender you're used to dealing with, and ask them about a 7A loan. They'll go and deal with the Small Business Administration. Small business owners don't have to deal with the government on this. Just deal with your regular banker. It's going to put an enormous strain on the banking system generally, but that's how it's going to work because they're the ones who are actually reaching out and touching all the individual businesses.
Manu, Eamon mentioned that the market dipped 900 points, the Dow Jones Industrial Average today, Friday. Are we going to see, if the economy continues to suffer, a phase 4, another round of legislation? How many options are left for Congress?
Yeah, that's one thing that the Democrats in the House are already talking about, a phase 4 rescue package. Remember, they've already passed an $8.3 billion package that was passed by bipartisan majorities in both chambers of Congress. And of course, there was a second major package that included more jobless benefits as well as Medicaid spending to the states and as well as paid leave. That was approved. That was a phase 2. And then this measure, the $2 trillion measure, the biggest rescue package in American history. And right now, Nancy Pelosi is talking about a phase 4. And I asked her today what her timeline is for that. And she said that she is this week, she's asking all of her chairmen of the key committees to submit proposals and ideas for how to move forward. She's talking about things like increased funding for state and local governments, also to ensure that people who are getting tested for the coronavirus, they get their treatment covered as well, things including more food stamps and the like, and more expansive paid leave policies. Things that the Democrats did not think that they did not get to their satisfaction in the last couple of pieces of legislation. They're pushing on this one. Now, Bob, the question is, though, if the Republicans are ready to move forward. Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, said that let's see how this $2 trillion stimulus package, how that is implemented first before we start talking about a phase 4. So Pelosi wants to push forward, and I think she needs to push forward by mid-April, potentially. We'll see if the Republicans decide to join hands here.
And, Susan, you think about Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker. You're writing a biography of Speaker Pelosi. We've already talked about Thomas Massie, the conservative libertarian who's been critical of this deal, but you also saw Representative Ocasio-Cortez of New York from the left criticize this deal, wonder if it has enough oversight. Is she prepared to deal with that kind of criticism from the left as she plows ahead, as Manu has sketched out?
Of course, she's had that kind of criticism from AOC from the very beginning of this Congress. I think that one of the remarkable things is this debate over the role of government has been settled to some degree. We have now accepted as a country, in the space of a couple weeks, a bigger role for the federal government than we ever had a consensus of before. Who do you turn to feed school kids, to support small businesses, to even take equity stakes in airlines, to do all the things that these series of bills have done? People are looking to the federal government to do it with almost no debate. And, you think about what the repercussions of that are going to be for the country, whether or not there is a fourth bill. The role of the government has just shifted in a big way. We're going to be dealing with that.
The ideological fault lines are scrambled. The Republicans backing direct payments to Americans, a plan that months ago was only being advocated by someone like Andrew Yang.
And we'll have blowback from that when we all catch our breath. But at the moment, the nation has agreed this is the government we want and need.